Goiko.
Goiko, yes.
That's too loud.
Probably not. I'll handle the volume. Just go.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Heather Van Kira. We're back at Jfokus 2018 on the night hacking stage. We have Goika Azik. Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us here.
Thanks.
Welcome. So you're doing your talk later, as soon as we're finished chatting here online. Maybe tell us a little bit about your talk, what you're going to share with us. It sounds like a really intriguing title, Humanity versus Computing.
Yes, the talk title is Humans versus Computers, and it's a summary of the research I've done for a book I've published under the same title on people that got stuck between bad assumptions and bad software. And I think software is now everywhere. Everything is done with software. You cannot avoid software. When you go to the bank, you're kind of using software. When you're applying for a driver's license, using software. And people build that stuff, and bad assumptions now ruin people's lives and creep into kind of everywhere. So I kind of wrote a book about typical types of bad assumptions, but they try to put a human spin on it so that people understand the dangers and the chaos we create by making really, really silly, simple, stupid assumptions. For example, my favorite story is from California a couple of years ago, where a guy called Richard Barber, I think, got rich selling a software company. And you know what software people do when they get rich? They go and buy a boat and they go and buy a car, of course. And,
of course. What else would you do
so
if you're
he bought
rich?
a boat, he started kind of sailing, and you know, as a rich person, when he buys a car, he wants to get customs license plates. So he goes into I don't know what the office is, Department of Motor Vehicles or something like that. And in order to get custom license plates, you need to put in a couple of choices because your first choice might not be available. And because he's recently bought a boat, his two first choices are boating and sailing. For the life of him, he couldn't think of a third choice. So as a third option, he just says, look, I don't want a license plate. But because the software had that as a mandatory field, he put in no plates. He couldn't make it like no. And of course, a month later, he gets plates that are no plates, which is funny for a while because, you know, he thinks it's a joke and he starts driving a car with the plates called no plates. A month later, he starts getting parking tickets from all over the US because the software for recording parking violations expects a license plate to be mandatory, and of course there are cars without plates, so parking officers all over the US have to, you know, put a parking ticket for a legally parked car without plates, and they had the same idea as him. So they start putting in no plates, and he gets all the parking tickets. So at some point he's getting something like 2,000 parking tickets a month. He's in court every day to, you know, defend this, and the judge, one of the judges there, you know, sees how insane this is, and he orders the DMV to stop issuing tickets. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to sort out all these computer systems overnight. So the simplest thing they could think of is create a policy where the officers are no longer allowed to put in no plates. They should put in missing. Now, everybody's happy for about 5 minutes, until a guy called Andrew, who's living a kilometer south from Richard, who's had the license plate missing for more than 8 years, starts getting all these parking tickets again. So it's kind of stupid stuff like that is caused by people assuming that everybody has a license plate, or that, you know, mandatory stuff is always mandatory, that creates chaos like that. And that's kind of what the book is about.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really something important that developers have to think about now, is that their work can impact and touch so many human lives, and what the results can be. But how do you come up with all of these stories? Where do you find these stories? I mean,
I don't know. I'm kind of a bug magnet myself, so I tend to kind of crash software all over me, or crash software near me, not all over me. So I was kind of interested in stories like that, and I started collecting stories like that for conference talks, and then I realized, well, the stories are interesting on, you know, in their own, and I think there's such a huge disconnect between people who develop software and people who suffer from those problems now that there's very little empathy in the software development industry.
Right.
And empathy for the user or empathy for is one of the key aspects of good UX. And I think helping people see the effects of their work and helping people empathize at least a bit more with people who suffer for their problems is really, really important. One of the weirdest stories I've found for the book is about this really elderly married couple. They're kind of 80 years old, living, I think, in Washington or something like that in the US, where for some reason, some developer once used their address in a testing database on a testing data field. And then they started appearing in some risk databases because of incomplete data, because the testing data got copied to production somehow.
Yes, that happens.
They ended up regularly getting these, Robocop police kind of breaking their doors down. They got something like 50, 60 raids on their house. They were in New York, not in Washington. The mayor of New York had to intervene for them to stop police kind of breaking down their door. And, we're talking about an elderly couple, kind of 80 years old, likely to get a heart attack if, Robocop police stormed their house in the middle of the night. And that's happening. That's insane.
It's a real life implication. And I often say to developers when we talk about careers is how important that emotional intelligence is and how, as developers, you can really differentiate yourself by developing that skill. But it does take real human interactions to develop. What kind of tips do you give developers in your talk? So your talk is coming up later this afternoon. What kind of tips do you pull
I'm going to talk about kind of things that people don't even have good testing heuristics on that we are now facing. For example, over the last 20, 30 years, we've developed reasonably good testing heuristics for dealing with user input when it's over the keyboard. But now the interfaces are moving away from keyboards and screens. We're moving to voice, we're moving to video, we're moving to touch. And we don't have good testing heuristics for that. And that's a big problem because, for example, I've read about this case where security researchers were able to use sounds below the range humans can hear to trip up Google Home and Alexa, to do all sorts of weird things. So, we don't even have, as an industry, developed heuristics for security research there, for testing, kind of things like script injection and user input validation. Most developers know how to do now. In late 90s, the early internet, one of my first jobs was to actually figure out how some people were able to get a massive, massive discount on an online store, and the people who developed this online store effectively allowed anybody to manipulate HTML and put in any price they want because they were not validating the price on the back end. Now, this was, 99 people were doing that. Now we've learned we validate inputs properly. Most developers know how to do that, but almost nobody knows how to validate audio or video and things like that. And it's really, really weird. And we're having these brand new interfaces moving into banks. For example, my bank in the UK, HSBC, introduced a voice ID where instead of remembering a password, they will do some kind of voice analysis on your voice and then recognize you as a person and let you have access to your account. It took about a month for a journalist called Dan Simmons from the BBC to fool it with his twin brother because they were leaving the same voice footprint. Most phones now do touch IDs. The new Apple phone does, voice recognition. As an industry, face recognition. As an industry, we have no idea what the edge cases are.
True.
We have not developed good practices, good heuristics. So it's really going to be interesting how we're going to deal with those things and what we deal. And about a month after the iPhone X came out, there were some researchers, I think in Vietnam, that fooled it with a very cheap plastic mask. And it's a like brave new world. Everything's opening up, with interfaces are changing, and I think that's where we really need to start learning better heuristics, because you know, with image recognition, for example, image recognition is a really, really interesting topic, machine learning and everything,
right.
and there's and I'm going to get the numbers wrong because I don't have the right numbers, but there's test for radiologists done at a Radboud University in the US where the best educated human ever scored something like 75%. Again, I don't know the exact number, but Google developed AI that scored 89. So at this point, computers can do machine learning can do radiology image recognition better than people who study that for 10 years and then, you know, spend 10 years doing practice in hospitals. We have computers that can do that better. Now, at the same time, those image recognition algorithms, again, what are the edge cases?
Right, we don't know yet what is going to be results of that.
There's a wonderful story about two sisters called Alison and Alicia Kennedy, and I'll talk about them later in the talk, who applied for a driver's license in the city of Evans, Georgia in 2016, and they completely tripped up a whole series of computers from the Department of Motor Vehicles to some kind of anti-terrorism database because they were twins. And all these computers thought that there were two people trying to apply for a driver's license under the same name. And they thought, well, this is really, really weird because there's some weird case of, you know, terrorism fraud going on. Must be, must be. And it's all insane. It's insane. We are entering this really interesting period of computing where how we approach software quality is going to have to change fundamentally.
Well, it sounds really interesting. I can't wait to hear your talk.
Thank you.
It sounds like we're going to hear lots more interesting stories as machine learning continues, and we can read your next book as it comes out in the future. So thanks for sharing with us. Look forward to looking at your talk, either in person or online.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.